Welcome, everyone, to Integrated Wellbeing podcast and YouTube channel, the place where we provide education, inspiration, and guidance to people grieving and the professionals who serve them. I'm Georgena Grace, and I'm very delighted today to introduce to you Michael Johnson. Hello, Michael.
Hi.
Michael is over in Idaho, correct?
Utah.
Okay. And we met at the American Association of Suicidology in a particular breakout that was for those of us who had experienced a suicide and were bereaved by that. And when Michael introduced himself and told his story, it took my breath away. And I wanted you to meet him because if Michael can still be walking and talking and doing the good that he is in the world, he's the beacon of light for anyone who has been bereaved by loss, and especially loss due to suicide. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about your website and your organization, and then we'll get into your story, please.
Sure. So we've got, I help out with a group here called Loved Ones Suicide Survivors, LOSS. It started shortly, it was the same year that I lost my girls. And so it was just starting up. There was no support groups here in Utah at all. And our founder, Mae Bradley, she got everything started and had, I think it was the third group that I actually attended for the first time.
Okay.
And we just provide peer-led support to anybody who's lost somebody to suicide. And we find it really comforting to be in a group with other people who have lost somebody to suicide because the relation is so much better. We relate to each other a lot better than you will with anybody else with different types of grief.
That's exactly right. It's a very, very unique grief. And you in your organization have created a pamphlet that's a guide for people. Will you show us that and tell us about it too, please?
Yeah, I'm starting the pamphlet here. Okay. Simply, it's a what do I do now? It's more of a pamphlet that we want to give to like the mortuaries, the first responders, people like that, so that when they go to somebody who has lost somebody to suicide, they have some information that they can give them for resources, because many times, even at the mortuaries, people are asking and don't have resources. And that's, one place that everybody ends up going, unfortunately, in the situation.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a brilliant idea. And it not only provides support to that person who's been bereaved by this sudden loss and shocking death, it also provides the resource then to the professionals. So that's really great. Yes.
And with my pamphlet, basically what I did, or what I'm doing, is it's basic information as far as some of the key topics that we go through in group when it comes up. Learn to be comfortable expressing your thoughts, find a lifeline, give yourselves time, little things like that. But then I put my experience as well into it, so that somebody who's reading this doesn't just read it as the dry pamphlet. They're getting personal experience from me as well. And then I tailored it a little bit more because my grief is a little different than most suicide grief.
Mm-hmm. So would you tell us, please, Michael, about your loss and grief journey, please?
Yeah. So it's always difficult to start.
It is.
So in 2014, my fiance and I were having some problems off and on, like any couple does. And we had a really large fight, a really big fight. And I threatened to move out. And then things escalated to where she kicked me out. And so I left that night. And she ended up we talked a little bit throughout the night, off and on, and then she basically blocked me, completely isolated herself, blocked me from everything. The next day I went over to go get some things, to move things out, because she had told me to come and move everything out. And she worked from home, and bedroom door was locked, and I thought she was just working. We moved things out. I kept trying to talk to her through the door, explain that, hey, we'll work this out. This is temporary. Let's just get through this little bad part that we're going through. And that night, when we went back to take the U-Haul back and stuff, I drove by the house and the car was still in the same place and the lights were all off and something just didn't seem right. And so we called her sister who lived around the corner. She came over, and as soon as her sister got there, I knew something was wrong. And her sister and my brother went into the house. I tried to get out of the car, and my brother kind of tackled me on the steps from going in, because he had gone in and found that she had killed our two daughters and killed herself.
So that takes my breath away, and I thank you very, very much for sharing that with all of us, because, yeah. And you kept reaching out, you kept saying, we'll get through this.
Yeah, tried to. And
you did, yes. Mm-hmm. And so often when people are in this state, they can't hear us. That was my experience with my son. I don't even know that he heard me say, every problem has a manageable solution and we'll get through this.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So how in the world, Michael, did you begin to cope after this horrific loss of 3 beloveds in your family?
I almost didn't. I struggled really bad. The first couple months actually were, I guess, better than the next couple of years.
Yes.
The first couple months was shock. It was the funeral. It was, talking with her parents and planning things. It was going through their stuff, deciding what to do with the clothes, just all sorts of stuff. And there was a part where Kyler lived in California. And so we were actually thinking of moving to California and living there. And so we had bought season passes to Disneyland and season passes to Universal and SeaWorld. And so I went back out there to the apartment that she stayed in and just kind of slept in the parking lot. I went to a couple beaches that we had gone to with the girls. We went to Disneyland, and that's where I proposed to her the year before. And I went and saw all these places because all these memories that I had with them, right? And I'm glad I did that, because in the future, it really helped me separate my memories of when I was there with them versus without them. It helped later. I didn't realize it at the time, because at the time I was just going to try and relive my memories. Mm-hmm. But in the future, that actually gave me the separation a little bit better, so that I could cope a little better when I went back to Disneyland and to Universal. But I was doing decent. I was doing okay. Came home, and so they died in January. And I remember this really clear. It was in April, and I was planting flowers out in the garden, just outside, and just the entire day I was crying. I could not stop crying. I was just nonstop. And I don't know whether it was because I was planting pretty flowers, whether, I don't know, it just hit me so hard that day. And I've got 2 boys that are older. And my youngest son was a senior in high school. And so he had moved in with me and was living with me. And he wasn't home. They weren't home. Neither of my boys were home. And that night I got really depressed. I got so depressed. I could not even imagine, and I went to cut myself. I put the razor blade on my wrist and started to cut. And then my thought was, I can't let my son find me. That was the thought. It wasn't, I can't do this I can't leave him. I can't, can't put him through this. Because at the time, I wasn't thinking of that. The only thing I thought of is he can't find me. And so instead, I started cutting my arm instead of my wrist. And I used that as a coping mechanism for a few months. I would cut my arm because I could fix that. I couldn't fix what was inside. I couldn't fix the problem I had between my mind and my heart. My mind was telling me it's not your fault. My heart was telling me, what did you do? That disconnect was so powerful for me. And so I started cutting my arm because I could cut and I could fix and I could patch it and I could care for it. And then when it healed, I cut again and again and again. And that went on for a while. Until my mother convinced me to get on depression medication. And I'd never used depression. In fact, I had never been around somebody who was really depressed that I knew of. So I'd never witnessed it. I've never experienced it. I've never done anything. And my mother convinced me to get on depression medication. And that leveled me out to the point that I didn't have that buildup of just frustration and anger. And so I quit cutting. And I hated being on the medication, but I stayed on it for a while. And then eventually I felt like, okay, enough time has passed that I feel like I could work through things. And so I got myself off the medication and the swings happened, the ups and downs happened, but I was far enough out that I wasn't hurting myself. And then I could actually start beginning to work on healing.
And how far out were you when you came off the medication, Michael?
It was just over a year. Yeah, so.
Wow, so you've done all of this in just over a year.
Yeah.
Amazing. So really and truly, when we do the math, that was 10 months, because those first 2 months were those months in shock.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So we've got January, February, March, and then April was when the nonstop crying.
Yeah.
And it was like, I've got to do something.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And then that part of you knew you did not want your son to find you.
Yeah. And that really was what it was. And looking back on it, it's incredible because in a way, I understand how she felt and how a lot of people who do die by suicide probably feel. Is I wasn't thinking about him. I wasn't thinking about what it will do to him. I was in so much pain. It was overwhelming. And I was just like, I've got to do something. I can't continue. And that was where my mind, I don't know why, but my mind was damaged enough that it said, hey, this is the best way out.
Yes. The pain was so great, you wanted it to stop.
Yeah.
And that's what has been the research findings and all the books that I've read by people who study suicide. Yeah. And it's the pain is so great, they wanted to stop. And in your own words, you just shared that with us. And yet there was that part of you that said, oh, I don't want my son to find me. Yeah. And that was that wise, loving part. And it's so remarkable to hear what you just shared about, I cut myself because I could fix that. Yeah. And it's interesting to me because as a person who works with people in the body, where does our arm start? It starts in our shoulder. Our shoulder is between our head and our heart. And your head and your heart were just giving you a really hard time because they weren't coming together. Yeah. And so it was this middle bridge is, in my observation, that was where you went. Plus the fact that you could see this, you could feel this. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, is every single person who is vulnerable and willing to share, and I can't thank you enough for being here today, is a teacher to not only me, but other people who choose to listen to this. So
And
thank
honestly,
you.
I get a lot out of it too. I mean, I think some of the best healing I've had is going to group, sharing my story, sharing with people what has helped me and what hasn't, and
Yes,
having people come to me and say, because of you, I know I can make it.
yes. And
And that helped me better than any other therapy I've ever had.
yes. And it's the truth.
It is. It absolutely is.
And it's that light in you that then becomes the lighthouse for
Yes.
them.
Yes.
Mhm. Well, since you mentioned it, I'm very curious. What didn't help with your grief? I have to censor this, but just share what you wish.
I don't know. I don't know if I really paid attention to things that didn't help. There were
Okay.
things that I did and then changed or just okay, that's not working. I do know that I was alone a lot and that wasn't good.
Was your mind spinning around then when you were alone a lot?
Pretty much. I mean, I would be home at night and I wasn't sleeping. I was just laying in bed. TV was on. I don't think I was even paying attention to what was on. It was just background noise.
Yes.
But my kids were home, so
Yes.
okay. And then when they'd go to school, I was home alone. I wasn't working at the time. I been off work a little bit, and yeah, the time by myself was not good. It caused me to think things that I shouldn't have been thinking. It caused me to really beat myself up because, well, I had all that time just sitting there thinking about it, which I was nonstop thinking about.
And what's remarkable to me, and we didn't talk about this beforehand, is you listen to your mother.
Oh yeah. I always listen to her.
Okay, she's a fortunate mother. Not all children listen to their mothers, and many times will shut them out.
Yeah.
And so it's such an amazing gift that you always listen to your mother. So for all of you viewers right now, please take a page from Michael's book and listen to your mother if she's still on the planet, because 9 times out of 10, she loves you dearly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, you've referred to groups several times. And I'm so grateful to hear that the group was started and you went, did I hear the third time the group met, you were there?
I think it was either the second or the third time ever.
Okay.
My mother had seen it on the news because May she had some friends that were in the news broadcasting, so she got some help. And it was on the news, so my mom sent me a link saying, hey, you should check out this. So I emailed and she told me when the group was, and yeah, the first couple of times I showed up, I did not want to be there at all. The personal counseling, I didn't like it. It wasn't going well. The counselor I had, I'm sure she was a good counselor, but she didn't have grief counseling experience, especially with suicide.
Wow.
So her whole project was trying to go through these little, I don't know, things where you write down stuff with your left hand instead of, and that's not what I needed. I needed to just vent. I needed to just talk. I needed to get input of my feelings are valid. And I couldn't get that from group or from individual counseling, but the group, I was able to hear somebody, hey, I did this. I went and did this and this helped me. So then I'm like, well, I guess I could try that. And hey, it worked. And then I wasn't sharing at first. I was just pretty quiet. Most everybody that were the facilitators in the group and stuff were really, really worried about me. I think they called my mother quite a few times because they saw the cuts, and I think they were really, really concerned about me. And the more I went to group, I started sharing a little bit more. And then when I would share, somebody would say something that, oh, that does help. Oh, that makes me, I understand that. Or, so then I started feeling like, yeah, my thoughts are not odd. You know, I always thought it's like, I must be crazy for having these thoughts. And it kind of made me realize that that's not the case. And realizing that I wasn't alone really helped me grow, really helped me accept the fact that I need to go through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only way out is through.
Yes.
And you did that. And what I'm also hearing that happened in the group that didn't happen in the one-on-one counseling is you got validation for your feelings and for the things that you were sharing that worked for you, that somebody else said, hey, that sounds like a really good idea. I'll do it too.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it really is. We here in Oregon, we have Suicide Bereavement Support Northwest, SBSNW. It's a .org, a foundation organization. And we have lines, we have groups online, and then we have groups in person. And however people, get here, they're welcome. And we always say to everyone who comes, whether they've come for the first time or the 20th time, it's very courageous of you to come, because it does take great courage to come. You don't know what you're getting into. In fact, we even made a video of what you may expect at your first group.
Yeah.
And for you to be able to have the wisdom to simply be there, to realize you didn't want to be there, but to stay is remarkable.
Yeah.
And even though those sound so simple, they're very, very difficult.
It really is. It really is.
I've
been here almost 10 years now.
Okay. And so the death happened in 2014, January
2014, yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm hearing that you went to the group then that very first year as well?
Yeah. So it was, so she started the group, I think, in April, and it was the first week in May that I went.
Wow. Do you realize the power of that timing? Because April was when you said, I can't do this. And then May was when the group was available and your mother saw it and shared it. So that's absolutely profound timing. And that you listened and followed is also profound, because that's why you're one of the reasons you're still with us here today.
It is.
And yeah. So often, Michael, my clients and people in the groups have taught me 3 facets of grief. Grief is navigating the ocean of emotion. And I'm curious what your emotions were. Mine were deep, deep, deep sadness and longing and guilt. Those were my 3. Did you have any that came up regularly?
The guilt was a big one. So for the first little bit, because of the nature of the murder-suicide, I spent a long time defending Kyler. I spent time trying to explain that she had mental illness. She was trying to fix this. She loved the girls. The hard part was, like, a year before this had happened, Kyler and I had a discussion about suicide. And she had told me straight up, if I want to do this, I know where I can get a gun and I will do it. And we argued, and I said, how can you do that? Her dad died by suicide when she was 3. And her mom never talked about it. Nobody ever talked about it. And so Kyler created stories as to why her dad left her. And I remember her telling me, why did my dad leave me? And telling me stories when she'd get drunk or something. And so, sorry, where was I going with that?
Well, you said you were defending her. You spent a lot of time that first year defending her, is where you started.
So I was defending her a lot. Every time anything would come up, I felt like I needed to, even if somebody else wasn't accusing, I felt like I had to defend that.
Sure.
For actions and stuff like that.
Right.
And I don't think I got angry at her until Kennedy's birthday. And so.
And Kennedy was one of the girls.
Yeah, so these are, so you can see here, these are my girls. Kennedy's the older one. Bella's the youngest.
Who's the youngest?
This is Bella, and this is Kennedy.
Darling. Oh, wow.
So Bella's birthday actually was 3 days before they died. We had a birthday party and everything for them. Kennedy's birthday is the day before mine. Sorry, that got really loud.
Don't worry.
Okay. Anyway, so Kennedy's birthday is the day before my birthday. Sorry, that's getting really distracting.
Okay, go ahead, take care of it. Life happens and we all know that. Yeah.
Can you turn that down?
Isn't this amazing?
Thank you.
To be here with Michael and to have him sharing his journey this way. And now he's back. Okay, when's your birthday?
So my birthday is June 14th. And
okay, Flag Day.
Yes. Yep. And so I didn't get angry at Kyler until Kennedy's birthday. And Kennedy's birthday, I got pissed. I quit defending her that day, especially. I was angry as I've ever been in my life that she took the girls. And I felt guilty. I think guilt was probably the number one thing, because I felt like I knew Kyler had some problems, and yet I still left. Her sister lived around the corner, and I didn't call her to tell her that we had that big fight. I left the girls there. The girls were off and on in California, and Kyler and her parents had an off and on relationship, and so half the time before I met Kyler, the girls were living with her family, with her dad.
Yeah.
And I insisted that if we are going to be a family, that we are going to be a family.
Yes.
And so a lot of me felt like if I didn't push that, they would still be safe. And thinking back on a few times, I know there was a few times that I had stopped this from happening without realizing it. But looking back on it, I know for sure I had stopped this from happening just because I happened to walk in at the right time.
So thank you for sharing your emotions of anger and guilt. And another facet of grief is grief brings up the deepest, darkest parts of ourselves, longing to be heard and healed. For me, it was, Michael, the perfectionism in me. Because being a perfectionist, underneath is anger, and life is never good enough. And I'm wondering if you had any revelations about yourself that you feel comfortable sharing.
I don't know if I really had any revelations.
So now we're on then to part 3. Who am I now? And your pamphlet, is what do I do now, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the who am I now, I'm imagining you've really learned a lot about that guy. And
I did.
Yeah.
I can't say that I came up with any revelations, but I was, for the most part, a fairly quiet, caring, gentle person.
Yes.
And I have become even more caring and gentle, because now I can see that somebody's worst day doesn't hold a candle to what I've gone through. And I also know it can also get worse. So I feel like, why pile on when somebody's having a bad day? Why should I get angry when somebody else is angry? And it has changed. I've become a lot more caring, a lot more compassionate person.
Thank you. That's what the world needs, is much more compassion, that gracious compassion where, you're having a bad day, and I'm not going to add to that.
Exactly.
Wow. So if our viewers could take that one thing with them, in addition to all you've shared, oh my.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that you would like to share as our time together comes to a close today? We have plenty of time, but I'm so grateful to you for you being you and you saying yes to this, because it takes you back to a state of deep and raw emotion. And I'm so grateful.
Every time I go to group and facilitate, I bring up my emotions and I bear myself open again and go through the pain, because I know how much good it does others to see it and to hear it. So I try not to hide it. I try to really express my true feelings and let people see that, yeah, 10 years later, I'm still crying. I'm still going through these things. And, my emotions are always right at the top, right, bubbling right there and just ready to boil over it. But I know it. I know it is. So I'm fine with it.
And that allows you to be that compassionate person.
Yeah. Yes,
and
exactly.
and at the Institute, we say, you're not broken by this loss, you're broken open like a seed to grow in self-awareness and new connections.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think if I was to tell anybody who's starting their journey through this terrible, awful journey,
It is.
it's difficult. It is hard, but there are no shortcuts. And if you try to take a shortcut, you will not grow through this. It's like there's I've seen this quite a few times. There's a diagram that shows, this is our life, right? It's like a ball.
Yes.
And once our loved ones died, our entire life becomes grief. And that grief will never get smaller. It'll never, ever get smaller. And what we do is we grow around it. We get bigger and our life gets bigger, and we learn to navigate the grief. And that doesn't just mean avoiding the grief. That means when we go through the grief, we know how to get out. We know how to work what we need to do while we're in it. And eventually we learn to go around it if we need to at times, But if you don't put in the hard work, if you don't address your feelings, if you don't accept what's going on, you'll never get to that point. And when you do get to that point, it's a lot easier.
Yes, it is. And so did you hear that grief never goes away? You grow around your grief, and you have the choice to keep growing and growing. And yes, and one of the things that Michael and I have done in communication for our time together today is we've emailed. And Michael shared with me that some things in his life, and he said, hey, I'm going back down into this with somebody else, and I may be very, very emotional. And I asked Michael to not apologize for crying. And Michael immediately emailed me back and said, I don't do that. So I want you to see a star in my life, because Michael, I hope before I leave the planet that all the interviews we see where people are showing their humanness because their emotions are coming up and out instead of being the stoic looking professional, they will not ever apologize. And you are a phenomenal model for that. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for coming today, and for each of you listening, that when you go to a group, there are things you'll learn. I just started teaching a class, Michael, at an adult community center here in the area. And it was Tuesday. And there were 11 people in me, so we were the great dozen. And it was so amazing because I had things prepared and I had materials, but it was the sharing and the comments of the group that made such a difference for so many people. So thank you very, very much for sharing your group experience with us.
So if I can, just 2 more quick things that I wanted to say.
Yes.
One reason I've said this phrase quite a few times in our group and stuff when I cry is that sometimes a memory leaks out of my eye down my cheek.
I love it.
Yeah, I've had a few people like really comment. I don't know where I heard that from, but it's stuck with me. So I use that a lot.
Thank
and then
you.
The other thing that when I first lost the girls, my mom has a really good friend that when we were kids, her husband died by suicide. And so she reached out to me afterwards and she told me a little bit of a story that helped me a lot. And she said, basically, when you first start out in your grief, it's like you've got this book and you can never put it down. And it's always in your lap. No matter where you go, it's there. And he's like, eventually you can put it up on the shelf and you turn around and it's back in your lap. And as you work through your grief, you start to put it up on the shelf and it stays there a little bit longer each time, maybe for a minute, and then you turn around and it's there again. The next day it's up there for a couple minutes. Eventually it gets to a point where you can put it up there and it stays there a little bit longer, until you get to a point where you can bring it down when you need it. You work through it and you put it back up. I mean, every once in a while it's gonna fall in your lap, but once you work through it, you know how to put it away and let it sit there until you need it again.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. So for each of you listening, as you feel that in your body like I did, again, you're a choice and you're learning to put the book back, and then it falls in your lap, but you know what to do. It doesn't crush you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. I've never heard that story before, and it is such a gift to me. And please tell that person when you see her again, thank you.
I will.
And each of us are here as wise guides for one another, and truly when we listen to ourselves. So thank you so much, Michael. This has been such a profound experience for me, and I know it will be for our audience as well. Thank you.